I'm Faith, and I am 35 years old. The kind of woman who learned early to make her voice small, so rooms would not notice when I slipped in and out. I say that with tenderness, not self-pity. There are seasons when survival looks like quiet. I married Ryan 2 years ago. And if you asked me why, I'd tell you about the first rainy night he walked me home with a squeaky umbrella. And how, for once, someone laughed at the nervous jokes I keep in my pocket for emergencies. But the fuller answer is this. I loved the way he looked at me as if I were a safe shore he could swim toward. And I was tired of being an island. I work with numbers and roofs, which is a fancier way of saying I manage other people's small apartments, and spend too much time staring at spreadsheets that look like city skylines. I don't parade that fact. Where I come from, showing money only teaches other people how to take it from you. And I have been taken from enough times to know the ache. I was not raised to be the center of any story. My mother complicated, brilliant at vanishing, taught me 3 moral laws. Don't brag. Don't beg. And never let strangers see your hunger. She could charm a room and then disappear inside her own smile. The way a magician folds a scarf into a hand that never opens again. My father, who liked to fix radios that never asked for help. I fixed our silences by turning up the volume on AM stations that played old love songs until midnight. We learned to hum around the words we could not say. Some families passed down recipes. We inherited exquisite ways to pretend. The morning the letter came, the city had a bruise-colored sky that threatened rain, and then refused to deliver. I was making tea in the chipped mug. I refused to replace. Because its crack has the shape of a coastline I once swore I would visit. The envelope was thick as a small book, and the return address was a law office I didn't recognize. My hands trembled a little. Ryan was humming in the shower. He always hums when he is at ease, and the apartment smelled like citrus cleaner, and the new laundry soap he insisted on buying because it was on sale. I slid my finger under the flap, and the sound it made was too loud for such a quiet morning. It was a formal letter. The kind lawyers write to prove their language can tie shoes and also nooses. My mother had named me executor of an estate I did not know. She owned a narrow, old house in a coastal neighborhood I had only ever seen through bus windows and daydreams. There was a key taped to the paper. Its teeth stained the color of forgotten coins. Beside the legal words, a smaller note in a familiar spiky hand. For whenever you are ready to know what we pretended not to know. No signature. But I could hear my mother's rueful laugh in the slant of the ink. My mouth went dry. I reread the sentence as if the grammar might shift and grant me mercy. The house had a name. Names mean history. History means chains. And the name was heliotrope. A word that made me think of a flower turning its throat toward the sun. And of the way my mother used to turn her face toward anything but us. For an hour, I moved around the apartment performing small, useless rituals, wiping the same 2 bowls, reorganizing the spices, correcting the alignment of the picture of us on the Ferris wheel, pretending I hadn't read what I had read. When Ryan came out, toweling his hair, I slid the legal envelope under an unpaid electricity bill, the way a child hides a forbidden magazine under the bed. "You okay?" he asked. And I told him I was thinking about lunch. He kissed my forehead. A quick domestic punctuation, and left to meet a client who always made him late for dinner, watching the door click shut. I felt an old ache wake in my ribs, as if the house inside the letter had tapped a spoon against the glass of my chest. I went to Heliotrope that afternoon. The street was a line of bones. All old houses leaning into the wind as if tired of standing for other people's stories. Heliotrope was the third from the corner, 2 stories. Narrow. A balcony that looked like it had listened to 100 secrets and told none. The paint was the color of pale sea glass. I stood there too long. A woman evaluating a stranger's face for family resemblance. Until an elderly neighbor watering a leggy row of basil peered up and smiled. Her cheeks were apples wrinkled in sunlight. "You must be Faith," she said, before I could introduce myself. And when I opened my mouth to ask how she knew, she nodded at the keys in my hand. "She told me you would come when the tide chose you." The pronoun hung between us like laundry. There is a kindness particular to older women who have survived their own families. It makes them fearless at naming things. Inside, the house smelled like lavender and something faintly metallic, as if a symphony and a toolbox had fallen in love. Dust motes rose when I stepped on the wood floors. Dramatists auditioning for a memory. The rooms were tidy in that way. Some people keep a pose long after the camera is put away. The mantel had a single photograph of my mother as a young woman in a summer dress, holding a baby whose face was turned toward the camera with solemn curiosity. I don't have a baby photo of myself. It was a mean miracle to realize this might be it. Under the frame, a short brass plaque read, simply Jenny. The word hit me like a wave. Jenny was my mother's sister's daughter, older than me by 6 years, who used to braid my hair when we were little until she abruptly stopped visiting and the grown-ups changed the subject whenever I said her name. I hadn't seen her since I was 12. The last time, she had a band-aid on her knee and a secret she wouldn't tell. I swallowed, hard enough to taste metal. Under the photograph, a shallow dish held a house key twin to the one in my hand and a seashell with a hole drilled through its heart, threaded on red embroidery floss. In the kitchen, I found a teapot with a small chip on its lid, and inside it, a roll of paper secured with twine. My hands hesitated, as if they belonged to a gentler woman. I untied it and began to read, and for a moment the house seemed to tilt, as if bracing for the weather this letter would bring. My faith. My mother had written. She never called me that when she was alive. She favored nicknames that erased the part of me she didn't understand. If this has reached you, it means I have finally done a brave thing far too late. There is a truth I made into a ghost, and then complained about the haunting. When you were born, I believed your father and I could outrun the old story. We didn't. You have an older sister. Her name is Jenny. She was not raised by me because I did not know how to love without owning, and I punished her for being first. The family arranged what families arrange when women become inconvenient. I watched from the doorway of my own life. The house is hers as much as it is yours. I had to sit down. A kettle whistled in my ears, though the stove was cold. I read the next lines through a blur that made the ink float like riverweed. There will be names in this that hurt to see. In one sentence, it continued. Ryan knows some of what I could not say. He met Nick before you did not by accident. People circle fields they have heard contain buried treasure. I told myself I was protecting you by staying silent. I was not. If this house can repair anything, let it repair you. If the sea can keep a secret, let it keep mine. Better yet, let it wash it clean. I folded the page with the precision of someone trying to control at least one thing. Ryan and Nick. My husband and a man I hadn't thought of in years, except as a rumor. Nick with the handsome grin and the habit of turning compliments into loans. He used to date Jenny. That much I remembered from overheard whispers. If Ryan knew Nick before I knew Ryan, and if my mother had pulled strings made of old guilt, then my marriage might be stitched with thread I hadn't chosen. I felt the air change around me, the way a room does when a storm lifts its head to sniff the window panes. I walked through the house room by room as if I could collect myself like stray hairpins. The upstairs bedroom had a quilt folded at its foot. Every square, an old shirt I recognized from photographs, my grandmother's yellow blouse, a faded Halloween pillowcase, a piece of my mother's dress with tiny violets, running my fingers over the stitches. I felt the patient rhythm of someone who made beauty while waiting for an apology that never came. The closet held a single cardboard box labeled with my mother's careful print for the girls. Inside, there were 2 journals. One was bound in cheap blue vinyl with the year stamped on the spine. The other was hand-stitched with red thread. I opened the blue one, thinking I would find weather reports and grocery lists. Instead, the first page said, "The day I gave Jenny away, I learned that the heart can grow another door just to slam it." The pages after that were a map of a hurt I had mistaken for indifference. I stayed until the light invented a kind of forgiveness at the windows. Before I left, I locked the door, and waited in the blue of the staircase until the house exhaled. Outside, the neighbor with the basil was bringing in her watering can. She lifted a hand the way people do when they know not to break your silence with their words. "She made soup when my husband died," she said softly, as if continuing a conversation we had begun years ago. "Not good soup, but the kind that says, 'I remember you eat, whatever you thought of her.' Remember she tried in the language she spoke." I nodded, and everything in me wanted to cry and did not. On the bus home, the city kept throwing its lights at me, and I kept failing to catch them. I counted traffic signals because numbers give grief edges. The letter in my bag felt heavier than a house. It felt like a tide chart telling me I had misread the moon. Back in our apartment, Ryan was already there, swiping through something on his phone with the practiced distraction of a man who did not want to be asked what he was reading. He looked up, smile ready, then dimmed it a watt when he saw my face. "Long day," he asked. And the question sounded like a test with an answer I couldn't give without changing the subject. I stood in the doorway, holding the keys, the way some people hold their breath. I had the impulse to drop them on the counter and watch them, to see what flicker of recognition disturbed his eyes. I thought of my mother's sentence, "Ryan knows some of what I could not say," and felt the familiar urge to protect him from the worst version of himself. The one who made promises in rooms where no one was listening. I thought of Jenny's name on the brass plaque, her infant face searching the camera for a parent who would not flinch first. I thought of Nick, the roomer with teeth, and of whatever it meant that our names were threaded, like beads on a string that someone else had threaded. What I did was simple. I placed the house key on the table between the bowl of oranges and the salt. As deliberately as a judge, setting down a verdict, the key made a small sound. Almost polite. Ryan glanced at it. Then at me. Then back. His smile tried to reappear and failed. I waited. Some truths don't need questioning. They need silence wide enough for the guilty to hear their own footsteps. He picked up the key as if it might bite, and turned it in his fingers like a coin. "New client?" he asked too casually. And I saw in the angle of the question the first visible seam in whatever story he thought we were telling together. Outside, the sky finally split and rain came down with the relief of a confession. The city smelled rinsed. I poured us both tea and watched the steam unspool like a ghost learning to walk out of a wall. In the next room, our photograph on the Ferris wheel tilted on its nail. As if remembering the wind, my phone vibrated once. A number without a name unknown. And yet known. The way a song is known before you recall the title. I let it go to voicemail. It was time to learn how to listen to what hurts without letting it ruin your hearing. It was time to choose a kind of courage my mother did not. Ryan poured tea with exaggerated care, his hands steady the way a liar's hands often are. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said lightly, the kind of tone that expected a small laugh in return. I didn't give him one. "Something like that," I answered. The house key still sat between us. A silver punctuation mark neither of us dared to touch again. He tried a smile. "It's just a key." "It's not," I said. "It opens a door my mother left behind. A door to everything we pretended not to know." The look that flickered across his face quick. Guilty. Swallowed. Confirmed what I already suspected. He knew about heliotrope. He knew before I did. That night, when he slept, I lay awake tracing the cracks in the ceiling and realizing how love can turn into a code you spend years trying to decrypt. Every laugh we'd shared. Every apology he'd given too easily. Every time he said "we'll be fine" instead of "I'll fix it," they all rearranged themselves into new sentences. Ones that began to make sense only after midnight. By morning, I'd made a quiet decision. I packed a small bag documents, the journals from heliotrope, my laptop, and went back to the sea house. The air was cool and sharp, like the start of an argument. Inside, the silence waited. Familiar now. I sat on the floor beside the window and opened the second journal. the one stitched with red thread. It wasn't my mother's handwriting. The letters leaned forward. Impatient. Like a person always half ready to leave. The first page began. My name is Jenny. If you're reading this, we share blood, and maybe ruin. I don't know which matters more. The entry was dated 8 years earlier. It told of a marriage hers to a man named Nick. Charming and careless. He wanted a wife who would make him look successful. She wrote, and I wanted a husband who would make me feel less alone. We both got what we wanted until wanting became the crime. She described how Nick hid his job. How he whispered plans about easy money. How his lies spread like oil on water. And then Nick's best friend, Ryan, introduced him to a woman with quiet eyes and money she doesn't talk about. He said she would be perfect for a small arrangement. I thought he meant business. I didn't know he meant you. I closed the journal so fast, dust rose like startled birds. My pulse drummed in my throat. The story unspooled too neatly. Ryan meeting me at the restaurant wasn't coincidence. It was design. Jenny had been the rehearsal. I was the main act. I could have cried. I didn't. I took a long breath. The kind you take before setting fire to something that hurt you. By evening, I was back in the apartment. Ryan was at the counter making dinner as if he hadn't rewritten my life. I watched him slice vegetables. Careful. Methodical. Where did you learn to cook like that? I asked. He smiled, relieved by my ordinary tone. Nick taught me a few tricks. Nick. I repeated. Funny. My mother mentioned him. The knife paused midair. His shoulders stiffened. Did she? She said you two go way back. He put the knife down. We used to. I don't see him anymore. That's strange, I said softly, because I think you saw him more recently than you're admitting. I slid Jenny's journal across the counter. Do you want to tell me what part of this is a lie? Color drained from his face. He opened the journal, flipped through pages he'd clearly seen before, and closed it again. Faith. It's not what you think. It never is. He reached for me. But I stepped back. You targeted me. You and Nick. You thought I was just another quiet woman with money to spare. It wasn't like that at first. His voice cracked. I really loved you. I still do. You loved the idea of rescue. I said. You mistook safety for affection. He pressed his palms to his eyes. Nick made it sound harmless. A way to fix everything. And now it's a disaster. There was a strange calm in me. A stillness born from finally seeing the map of the maze. Then let's end the experiment. I left him standing there. Among the scattered vegetables and the smell of garlic turning bitter in the pan. For days, I heard nothing. Then came a message, one line from an unknown number. You deserve the truth too. Attached was a photo of a seaside cafe. The kind with white chairs and chipped paint. Beneath it, a signature Jenny. I went. She was already there. Older than I remembered, but still with that steady gaze that made you feel both seen and measured. You look like her, she said when I sat down. I look like everyone who's ever tried not to repeat her mistakes. I answered. We talked for hours. About our mother. About Nick, who had vanished after draining her accounts. About Ryan, who had been his accomplice and maybe his victim. Jenny had left him years ago. Rebuilt her life, brick by brick. I didn't know he found you, she said. If I had, I would have warned you. I sipped my coffee. Cold now. Maybe I needed to find out on my own. She smiled, sad and approving. Then you're one of us. Before we parted, she pressed something into my hand. A folded check. Repayment for the inheritance our mother had hidden. The kind that buys closure more than comfort. Keep the house, she said. It suits people who survive. That night, I went back to the apartment one last time. Ryan's things were gone. His closet emptied, except for the ghost of his scent. On the kitchen counter lay the key to heliotrope, and a note in his handwriting. I'm sorry. I never deserved any of it. I didn't cry. Some endings are too symmetrical for tears. I picked up the key, locked the door behind me, and walked into the dawn. Heliotrope waited, quiet as forgiveness. I opened the windows, let the sea air in, and whispered to no one. This house will learn my real name. For the first time in years, I felt the floor steady under my feet. The days that followed felt like a fever breaking. The air in heliotrope carried the scent of salt and damp plaster. But there was light now, honest, unfiltered light that crawled into every forgotten corner. I filled the silence with small sounds, the kettle whistling, pages turning, my bare feet on the creaking wood. It was the first time in years I had heard my own rhythm without someone else's noise beating through it. I started keeping a journal, not for posterity, God knows too many of those had already been written, but to understand the pattern of my own thoughts. The first line I wrote was, "The opposite of betrayal isn't trust, it's clarity." I read that sentence every morning like prayer beads. On the third day, a knock came, not timid, not aggressive, just deliberate. When I opened the door, Jenny stood there, hair pulled back, eyes soft but unflinching. She looked like someone who had spent years learning how to hold peace in both hands without breaking it. "I didn't think you'd find me this fast," I said. "I followed the sea." She replied with a small shrug. "It always leads to heliotrope." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and somehow it didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like a missing sound returning to a melody. "I thought you'd keep the house," she said, glancing around at the boxes I hadn't unpacked. "But you look like you're ready to run again." "I don't run," I said. "I just migrate when the weather changes." She smiled. "That's what running sounds like when you make it poetic." We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had read our mother's letter, and shared the kind of silence only blood can make bearable. Then she slid a small envelope across the table. "Nick wrote to me," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. "When?" "2 weeks before he disappeared. It came through a friend of a friend. He said Ryan had promised to handle the last deal. That it was supposed to make things right." "Right for who?" "Exactly." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, grainy. Taken from a phone, Ryan and Nick together in some unfamiliar cafe, leaning close over papers and a laptop. Their smiles were thin, mechanical, like salesmen closing the wrong deal. On the back, Nick had scrawled, "Tell Faith I'm sorry if she ever learns. End of Trapper." Jenny looked at me. "They used you as collateral. The properties. The investments, they leveraged your name for a loan. When it fell through, Ryan panicked. He tried to pay it back before you found out. That's why he disappeared." I exhaled through my teeth, a sound like metal bending. So the guilt was real. Yes, but guilt isn't redemption. I stood, walked to the window. Outside, the sea was dull, silver, restless under a growing wind. "Do you think he'll come back?" Jenny tilted her head. "Do you want him to?" I didn't answer. The truth was complicated. Ryan was both the knife and the hand that shook while holding it. That night, I dreamed of our mother for the first time in years. She was younger, standing on the balcony of heliotrope. Her hair caught in the wind. She looked at me and said, "We are all someone's unfinished sentence. Finish yours." Faith. I woke before dawn, trembling, but clear. Jenny was still asleep on the couch. I made coffee, sat by the window, and started writing my letter, the one I should have written long ago. To Ryan. "You wanted to fix something that was never yours to mend. You took pieces of my calm and built a life that couldn't stand on its own. I forgive you not because you earned it, but because I refuse to carry your ruin in my pockets any longer. I hope you find silence and learn how heavy it feels when there's no one left to fill it for you. Faith. I sealed it. No address. Sometimes forgiveness is just a letter you never send. Later that afternoon, Jenny and I walked along the beach. She told me she was thinking of moving closer. Maybe to the next town over. We could start something together. She said, a small business. Real estate. Maybe. You understand foundations. I understand people. I laughed. So you'll charm the clients. And I'll make sure the walls don't fall. Exactly. We stopped by the tide line. The waves cold against our feet. Do you think Mom would be proud of us? I asked. Jenny looked out at the horizon. I think she'd finally rest. Weeks passed. The house became ours, not a monument to loss, but a workshop for survival. We painted the rooms ourselves, burned old letters, kept the ones that still taught us something. Sometimes we argued over little things, paint colors, grocery lists, but the air between us stayed soft. Never brittle. We built new rituals, tea at dusk, music in the morning. No secrets left to fester. One evening, as we were closing the shutters, a car stopped outside. Headlights washed across the porch. Then went dark. A man stepped out thin, tired, holding a small envelope. Ryan. I felt my heart beat slow. Not quicken. Jenny stepped beside me. Solid as a wall. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. I just came to return what's yours. He held up the envelope. Inside were property papers, the ones tied to the loans. I paid it back. Every cent. I didn't move. And what do you want now? Nothing, he said. Just to tell you I'm sorry. Properly this time. Jenny's hand brushed mine, grounding me. You already said that. I told him. In a note. I needed to say it where it mattered. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The sea behind us hissed like something keeping time. Finally, I nodded. Then go live differently. That's the only apology that counts. He looked at me relieved. Wrecked. Older and left. When the taillights vanished, Jenny exhaled. Closure. Not yet, I said, but closer. That night, I stood on the balcony where my mother had appeared in the dream. The air was salt and memory. Below, the sea kept rewriting itself against the rocks. Endless. Forgiving. Unending. I whispered into the wind. Heliotrope. And the word tasted like both grief and peace. Tomorrow I'd list the apartment in the city for sale. Tomorrow Jenny and I would register our new business, Heliotrope Restorations. A name for fixing broken homes and maybe, quietly, the people who lived in them. For now, I sat with the night. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about inheritance, the kind that doesn't fit into wills or property deeds, but into the way two women rebuild what their mothers left undone. If you've ever been betrayed, remember this. The wound isn't the ending. Sometimes it's just the doorway to the life you were meant to live after the house burns down. And if you've listened this far, thank you for keeping me company through the storm. If my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe so others might find the strength to start again. Tell me in the comments what you would rebuild if no one could take it from you.